Welcome back to AM Northwest. Feeling burned out? Well, you're not alone. It's a challenge faced by many, especially those on the autistic spectrum. Here to help, we welcome the author of the Autistic Burnout Workbook, Dr. Anna Neff. Good to have you with us. First of all, let's talk about why you wrote this book.
Yeah, so this book is really the culmination of my work over the last 4.5 years or so. My story is unfortunately not that unique in that I actually didn't know I was autistic until I reached adulthood, and that
Wow.
can be quite common for autistic women especially. And when I learned this about myself, all of a sudden, a lot of things in my life really clicked into place. My social history, my mental health history. So it was a pretty significant moment for me. Now, one thing that perhaps is a bit more unusual is that I also happen to be a clinical psychologist. So when I discovered this, I had this pretty profound aha moment, realizing how many people my field is missing, how many adults, specifically the lost generation of autistic adults. And so a lot of my work has focused on raising awareness around this lost generation, autistic women especially, as well as autistic people of color and genderqueer folks. Because one of the things we know is these adults actually are in treatment for either psychiatric treatment or mental health treatment, and many of them are undiagnosed, working on mental health conditions. And as long as their autism is missed, it's going to be hard to get traction on some of the other things.
Yeah.
One of the things in the mix is autistic burnout. Autistic burnout can look a lot like depression, anxiety, and unfortunately, it can be one of the pathways for autistic depression and suicidality, which there's very high rates of suicide risk among this population. So when we say autistic burnout matters and is life-saving work, unfortunately, that's not hyperbolic. So a lot of my work has been around raising awareness of adults, autistic adults, as well as autistic burnout, so that mental health professionals and adults can be considering if this might be a part of their story.
So our viewers can connect with this. How did you recognize that you may have autism? Like, how did it manifest itself?
So this also is kind of a common story for many of the adults. It was after a diagnosis of one of my children, and then because I'm a psychologist, all of a sudden I got really interested in understanding autistic girls and different presentations, and I kind of poured myself into it, was learning a lot about some of the internal experiences, especially that autistic girls and women can have, and that's when I started connecting the dots for me.
But like what?
So
a lot
many
of
things.
daydreaming?
Well, I'm also ADHD, so yes.
Yeah,
yeah, but that I attribute a bit more to the ADHD. So partly, one of the ways I described it is I often felt like I was living behind plexiglass, like I couldn't get into my life.
Oh, wow.
And what I later discovered is what I was actually describing as low-grade dissociation from sensory overload. That even in this moment, it's happening.
Well,
like
there's a lot.
There's a lot
happening
here.
Yeah.
So that experience I was having was a chronic sensory dysregulation. A lot of the mental health experiences, the depression, the anxiety, my relationship history of not really being able to integrate deeply into groups, but not knowing why.
Yeah.
Always been comfortable when I'm talking about academics, but then when it's a little bit more of that social ligament stuff, I could never do that very smoothly.
Yeah.
And I could never have the kinds of friendships I wanted to have.
Yeah.
So there's also a lot of conflict around my relationship history.
Does the sensory overload that you talk about, does that contribute quite a bit to the burnout?
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, a whole chapter of that book is all about getting to know your sensory profile and learning how to build in accommodations. And again, that's one of the pieces if they don't know this about themselves, they might think they're just having like an emotional meltdown, but maybe it's actually a sensory meltdown. So because a lot of us are chronically sensory dysregulated, that absolutely
So what are
contributes.
some of the symptoms of a burnout?
So for burnout, chronic exhaustion,
Yeah.
and very, very pervasive when it's autistic burnout. And then sensory sensitivities tend to increase during burnout. And so there will be more of those sensory meltdowns or those sensory shutdowns where you start feeling kind of foggy. That would be a shutdown. And then another common thing is loss of skills. So this can look like, if the autistic person typically has access to speech, that is something where all of a sudden speech becomes much harder for them, or executive functioning skills. So all those skills we use to organize our day and get through our typical daily activities, those can become a lot harder.
In the workout book, because it is a workout book, I mean, you can go through and fill out chapters actually. But tell me how, maybe one tip for folks who are dealing with it, and also maybe how people who love them can help.
Yeah. Goodness, if I was going to choose one tip, I think it would go back to the sensory, because I do think so much of it goes back to that, to understanding your sensory profile. And yes, there's checklists in there to help you understand what are my sensory preferences, what are my sensory triggers. And then for the people supporting an autistic person, really developing a lens, a sensory lens.
Yeah.
So we're very quick to perhaps assign character or value to behavior, like that's bad behavior. But if we have a sensory lens, we can maybe see, oh, actually maybe there's a sensory reason. Maybe I can dim the lights here. Maybe I can bring in some sensory support for my child or for my partner. And so that's probably the piece I'd zoom in on.
Wow, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We want to tell everyone again, the book is titled The Autistic Burnout Workbook, Your Guide to Your Personal Recovery Plan. Megan, Anna, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right, we'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away.